He was a millionaire that no doctor could cure. But a single touch from a virgin waitress was enough to bring him back to life. No one imagined the price she would have to pay to save him. If you enjoy love and romance stories, watch until the end, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where you're watching from. Stay tuned. The rain hammered against the panoramic windows of the penthouse in Soho, New York, while Daniel Stern observed the city disappearing into the grey mist. At 42, he had built an empire spanning 3 continents, but at that moment, hunched over the massive mahogany desk, he felt smaller than a homeless person on the streets below. The pain that had been consuming him for months gave no respite, as if 1,000 incandescent knives were simultaneously tearing at his insides. Son of Michael Stern, a European magnate who owned one of the world's largest hotel chains, and of Helen Vanderbilt, an American socialite descended from cotton barons, Daniel had inherited not only a fortune valued in billions, but also the arrogance that came with it. From a young age, he had learned that money solved everything, that power could buy anything, that men like him knew no limits. At 23, when he assumed control of the conglomerate after his father's premature death, he already demonstrated the calculating coldness that would make him feared in the most exclusive business circles. His investments went far beyond luxury hotels scattered throughout Europe, America, and Asia. There were rumors about his participation in obscure military contracts, weapons technology developed in secret laboratories, and businesses that never appeared in official reports. Daniel cultivated this aura of mystery and danger, knowing that fear was as effective as money when closing deals. His athletic body, sculpted with a soldier's discipline, was the result of years of private military training. He woke up at 5, every morning for 2 hours of intense exercise, followed by a rigorously controlled diet. Each defined muscle, each precise movement, everything was part of his obsession with absolute control. Women desired him, men envied him, and he collected both feelings like trophies. But on that cold March morning, when he woke up feeling as if fire serpents were coiling around his internal organs, for the first time in his life, Daniel discovered there was something his money couldn't buy, the cure for a disease that didn't even exist. During the following 6 months, he went through 50 doctors, secret specialists who took care of Middle Eastern kings, surgeons who operated on Silicon Valley CEOs in clandestine clinics, healers from African tribes brought by private jet. Each charged small fortunes only to tell him what he refused to accept. There was no diagnosable cause. The world's most sophisticated exams detected nothing. His blood was perfect. His organs functioned normally, but the pain persisted, growing like a hungry beast devouring his sanity. Gradually, Daniel felt his arrogance crumbling like old paint. He began cancelling meetings, avoiding mirrors, spending entire days locked in the penthouse, observing the city through bulletproof glass, while wondering if this was the cruel way fate had found to collect payment for decades of cruelty. On a particularly torturous night, when not even the most potent painkillers could alleviate his suffering, he did something he never imagined. He went out alone, without security, without a driver, without anything that identified him as the richest man in the country. He wore a white linen shirt and black slacks, took the keys to one of the less ostentatious cars from his collection, and drove through New York's deserted streets. The nocturnal city received him with hostility. The rain had transformed the sea, avenues into dark rivers, and the few pedestrians crossing his path seemed like hurried ghosts. Daniel drove without destination, just fleeing from the pain that pursued him like a shadow. Cold sweat stuck his shirt to his chest, and he felt his hands trembling on the wheel. For the first time in decades, he experienced pure desperation, without filters, without masks. That's when he saw the flickering sign, 24RR Diner, Anna's Place. A humble place, almost empty, that seemed like a beacon in the darkness. He parked and entered, driven only by the desperate need to drink water and perhaps find a moment of peace away from his golden prison. The environment was simple, with worn formica tables and plastic chairs, but there was something comforting in the simplicity of that place. And it was there, in that unlikely setting, that Daniel Stern found the woman who would forever change the course of his cursed life. Sarah was leaning on the counter, organizing sugar packets with delicate and precise movements, when she heard the door open. She looked up and saw a tall man with broad shoulders, who walked strangely, as if each step was a painful effort. His dark hair was damp from the rain, and there was something in his expression that made her stop what she was doing. It wasn't just fatigue. It was a kind of silent desperation that she recognized well. At 27, Sarah had learned to read people's pain as if they were open books. She had grown up in the small town of Pine Hollow in rural Vermont, raised by her grandmother Elizabeth, a respected healer who knew the secrets of medicinal plants and ancient prayers. When she was 17, a rich man from the city offered a fortune to take her as his wife, but there was something sinister about that proposal. Her grandmother woke her in the middle of the night, put some clothes in a bag, and whispered, "You have a gift, child. But you also have a curse. Leave before they discover it." Sarah never fully understood what that meant, but she obeyed. She arrived in New York with little more than the clothes on her back, and her grandmother's teachings engraved in her memory. For the past 10 years, she had worked various jobs, always keeping herself invisible, always avoiding drawing attention. There was something about her that people couldn't explain, a presence that calmed nerves, that relieved pain, that brought peace even in the most turbulent moments. When the man approached the counter, she felt a strange energy emanating from him. It wasn't just physical illness, it was something deeper, as if his soul was being devoured from within. He asked only for a glass of water, but Sarah noticed how his hands trembled, how sweat glistened on his forehead, despite the night's cold. His eyes were an intense blue, almost violet, but carried a sadness that contrasted with the elegance of his expensive clothes. "Are you all right?" she asked, with the soft voice she'd inherited from her grandmother, the one that had the power to calm wild horses and frightened children. The man looked at her with an expression of surprise, as if he didn't expect anyone to care about his well-being. For a moment, their gazes met, and Sarah felt a strange connection, as if she had known that suffering for a long time. He didn't answer, but he didn't need to. His body spoke for him. The irregular breathing, the unnatural paleness, the way he curved slightly to the left, as if protecting something inside himself. Sarah had seen this type of pain before, in people her grandmother treated when she was still a child. It wasn't an ordinary pain. It was something conventional doctors couldn't understand. Ignoring the disapproving look from the manager watching her from across the counter, Sarah came out from behind the counter and approached the man. There was something magnetic about him, a force that attracted her inexplicably. When she sat in the chair beside him without asking permission, she felt a strange vibration run through her body, as if two opposing energies were meeting for the first time. "I can help you," she whispered, and this time it wasn't a question. It was a statement loaded with a certainty that she herself couldn't explain. She began talking about her grandmother, about the herbs that grew in the fields around Pine Hollow, about the ancient techniques that had been passed down from generation to generation. Her words flowed like water, soft and comforting, and she noticed that the man was listening to every syllable with almost desperate attention. Daniel observed her, as if he were seeing a miracle. There was something about that woman that defied everything he knew about the world. Her loose waitress uniform couldn't hide the natural delicacy of her movements, and her brown eyes shone with a wisdom that seemed much older than her 20-something years. When she spoke about healing, about medicinal plants, about secrets that modern medicine had forgotten, he felt a pang of hope that he hadn't experienced in months. But when he tried to stand to leave, everything went dark. The pain exploded in his abdomen with an intensity that made him stagger, and the last thing he saw before fainting was Sarah's concerned face leaning over him, whispering words he couldn't understand, but which, somehow, reassured him. He woke up in a place completely different from what he expected. He wasn't in a hospital, nor in his luxurious penthouse. He was lying on a simple bed, covered with clean sheets that smelled of lavender, in a small room lit by candles. The walls were painted light blue, and there were plants everywhere. Small pots with herbs he didn't recognize, dried branches hanging from the ceiling, and an improvised altar with images of saints and offerings of flowers. Sarah was sitting in a chair beside the bed, preparing some sort of tea in a white porcelain cup. When she noticed he had awakened, she smiled with a tenderness that made him feel vulnerable in a completely new way. "You fainted," she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "But you'll be fine now." Daniel tried to get up, but Sarah placed her hand gently on his chest, and he felt a strange warmth spreading throughout his body. "Don't move yet," she whispered, and there was something in her voice that made him obey without questioning. For the first time in decades, someone was giving him orders, and he felt strangely grateful for it. The room was small, but there was a peace in it that completely contrasted with the empty luxury of his penthouse. Green-eyed cats watched him from strategic corners, like silent guardians. On the shelves, glass jars contained twisted roots, dried leaves, and seeds that exhaled unknown aromas. An oil lamp projected dancing shadows on the low ceiling, creating an atmosphere that seemed to belong to another century. Sarah handed him the cup of tea, and when their fingers touched, Daniel felt an electric shock run up his arm. The liquid was bitter, with a taste of earth and wildflowers that burned his throat, but immediately after swallowing he felt something changing in his body. The pain, which had been torturing him mercilessly for months, diminished to a bearable hum, as if someone had turned down the volume on a deafening music. "How?" was the only word he managed to pronounce, looking at her with a mixture of disbelief and reverence. Sarah smiled, and for the first time he noticed how her lips were perfectly drawn, how her skin had a natural luminosity that none of the women in his life had managed to achieve, even with the most expensive treatments. "My grandmother taught me," she said, preparing a second cup. "She used to say that some diseases aren't born in the body but in the soul, and that when the soul is sick, the body screams for help." Her words were simple, but carried a wisdom that made Daniel feel naked, exposed, as if she could see through all the masks he used to hide his true nature. In the days that followed, he refused to return to his penthouse. He called his assistants, cancelled meetings, invented excuses. For the first time in his adult life, the empire he had built took a back seat. He stayed in Sarah's house, watching her prepare mysterious infusions, herbal baths that made his skin tingle and warmed his blood in a way he couldn't scientifically explain. Each ritual was accompanied by prayers whispered in a language he didn't recognize, but which seemed to open cracks in his closed soul. Sarah moved around the house like an ancient dance, her small, precise hands manipulating ingredients with a wisdom that defied his rational upbringing. He watched her, hypnotized, feeling stronger each day and, at the same time, more vulnerable. During the afternoons, when the pain diminished enough to allow conversations, Sarah told him stories about her childhood in Pine Hollow. She talked about her grandmother Elizabeth, who knew the name of every plant in the forest, about the healing rituals that were performed on full moon nights, about the secrets that were passed only from woman to woman, always in whispers, always away from male ears. "Why did you never marry?" Daniel asked one afternoon, watching how she organized her herbs with the care of someone handling precious jewels. Sarah stopped what she was doing, and he saw a shadow cross her face as if a cloud had covered the sun. "I can't," she answered, her voice almost inaudible. "My grandmother explained to me that my gift comes from a special connection with the sacred. If I am touched by a man, if I give up my purity, the spirits that protect me will abandon me. And then—" She paused, her eyes filling with tears that she quickly wiped away. "Then I die." Daniel felt something twisting in his chest, a mixture of desire and terror that left him speechless. There was something primitive about her, an innocence that awakened instincts in him that he didn't know he possessed. For the first time in his life, he wanted to protect someone more than to possess them, but at the same time, he had never desired a woman with such intensity. That night, he dreamed that he made love to her on the wooden floor of the simple house, while snakes coiled around their feet and whispered secrets in dead languages. He woke up sweating, excited and terrified, smelling her scent mixed with the acrid perfume of herbs. Desire consumed him with the same destructive force as his old disease, but now he knew that touching her would mean destroying her. As the days passed, Daniel realized that his healing went far beyond the physical. For the first time in decades, he slept without nightmares, woke up without the compulsive need to control everything around him. Sarah's presence transformed him in a way he couldn't understand, as if she were healing wounds he didn't even know existed. But there was something Sarah hadn't told him, something that made her wake up in the middle of the night with her heart racing. Since she had started caring for him, the dreams had returned. Dreams of her hometown in flames, of masked women whispering that she had betrayed her destiny. Dreams of a man in a dark suit who was looking for her, who knew where she was, who was coming to collect an ancient debt that she had tried to forget, but that had never forgotten her. Dr. Richard Matthews had always been a man obsessed with discoveries that could transform him into the world's most powerful doctor. A former military surgeon, he had been expelled from the army for organ trafficking and unauthorized experiments on wounded soldiers. Now, at 52, he commanded a clandestine network of clinics that served millionaires, willing to pay any price for treatments prohibited by conventional medicine. When Daniel Stern disappeared from his schedule after months of frustrating consultations, Matthews initially thought the magnate had given up or died. But when his informants reported that Stern had been seen on the streets, apparently cured, a dangerous obsession took over the doctor. If someone had managed to solve the case he considered impossible, he needed to discover how. Matthews activated his network of contacts, ex-military private investigators, hackers who monitored security cameras throughout the city. It didn't take long to discover that Daniel had been frequenting a simple house in Brooklyn, where a young woman who worked as a waitress lived. A woman who, according to his investigations, had no medical history, but who apparently possessed abilities that defied modern science. Meanwhile, in Sarah's house, the atmosphere had become charged with a tension that neither could ignore. Daniel was completely healed, but refused to leave. He spent his days observing her every movement, every delicate gesture, every shy smile she offered him when preparing his meals. The attraction between them grew like a silent storm, electrifying the air whenever they found themselves in the same room. Sarah felt the weight of his gaze upon her, and it disturbed her in a way she had never experienced. When he was nearby, her heart raced, her hands trembled, and she caught herself imagining what it would be like to be touched by those long, elegant fingers. But every time these thoughts arose, she heard her grandmother's voice echoing in her mind. Your purity is your protection, child. Lose it and you'll lose everything. One night, while preparing a chamomile tea to help him sleep, Daniel approached from behind and placed his hands on the counter, one on each side of her body, trapping her without touching her. Sarah could feel the heat emanating from him, the masculine perfume that intoxicated her, the irregular breathing that indicated he was fighting an internal battle. "Sarah," he murmured, his voice hoarse with contained desire. "I can't pretend. I don't feel anything anymore." She closed her eyes, fighting against the urge to lean back and let herself be enveloped by that magnetic presence. "I know you feel it too," he continued, his lips almost touching her ear. "I see it in your eyes, in the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching." "No," she whispered, but her voice came out weak, without conviction. "You don't understand. I can't. If I give myself to you, I'll die. It's not a metaphor, Daniel, it's real." She turned to face him, and he saw tears glistening in her eyes. "My grandmother told me about other women in our family who broke the rule. They all died in terrible circumstances." Daniel raised his hand to touch her face, but stopped in the air, his fingers trembling with desire. "What if I don't care about the risk? What if I say I'd rather have you for one day and die than live the rest of my life without ever having felt your skin?" "But I care," Sarah replied, moving away from him. "I care about your life, about your future. You have an empire to command, responsibilities, people who depend on you. I can't be selfish enough to destroy all that because of a desire." That same night, Sarah had the most vivid dream of her life. She was back in her hometown, but everything was different. The houses were burned, the trees were dry, and the sky had a red color that hurt the eyes. Masked women walked through the deserted streets, whispering her name, saying she had betrayed her lineage by saving a cursed man. In the center of the town, there was a bonfire where she recognized her grandmother Elizabeth, but not as she remembered her. The old woman had white eyes, hands extended toward her, and from her mouth came words that froze the blood. "You chose your destiny, child. Now he will come to claim what is due." She woke up screaming, and Daniel, who was sleeping on the living room sofa, ran to her bedroom. He found her sitting on the bed, trembling, her face bathed in tears. Without thinking, he sat beside her and pulled her into his arms, feeling how perfectly she fit against his chest. "It was just a nightmare," he murmured, caressing her hair. "Everything's fine now." But Sarah knew it wasn't just a nightmare, it was a warning. Forces she had tried to forget were moving, and her decision to save Daniel had put them both in danger. The next day, she decided to tell him the whole truth. About the sacrifice ritual that her family had practiced for generations, about how she had been chosen as a child to be offered to a rich man, about how her grandmother had helped her escape before it was too late. "They believed that my purity, voluntarily given to a powerful man before killing him, would bring prosperity to the entire town," she explained, avoiding looking into his eyes. "But my grandmother told me there was another way, that I could use my gift to heal instead of kill." Daniel listened to her in silence, and when she finished, he understood that his healing had been much more than a simple treatment with herbs. Sarah had used her power to save him, but in doing so she had awakened forces that had remained dormant for 10 years, and now those forces were coming after them. Dr. Richard Matthews was getting closer to his prey. Through his investigations, he discovered that Sarah wasn't just an ordinary waitress, but someone with extraordinary abilities that could revolutionize modern medicine. If he could study her methods, her knowledge of medicinal plants, he could create a new line of treatments that would make him the most powerful doctor in the world. He had already set up a secret laboratory in an isolated farm on the outskirts of Albany, equipped with cutting-edge technology and a team of researchers who asked no questions. All he needed now was to capture Sarah and discover the secrets she kept. He didn't care about the methods he would have to use, nor the consequences for her life. In Sarah's house, the tension had reached an unsustainable point. Daniel spent his days watching every shadow, every strange movement on the street, feeling that something terrible was approaching. His experience in business had taught him to trust his instincts, and they all screamed that they were in danger. "We need to leave here," he said one morning, after another night when Sarah had woken up screaming from nightmares. "I can take us to a safe place far from New York where no one will find us." But Sarah shook her head, her brown eyes shining with a determination he had learned to respect. "Running won't solve anything," she replied, preparing a lemon balm tea that helped calm the nerves. "If someone is looking for me, they will eventually find me. And there's something else." She paused as if gathering courage to continue. "I feel that my time is running out. Each day I spend by your side, each moment I resist what I feel. For you, it's as if something inside me is dying." Daniel approached her, his blue eyes shining with an intensity that made her tremble. "Then don't resist," he murmured, raising his hand to touch her face. "If our time is limited, why waste it fighting against something we both want?" For the first time, Sarah didn't move away. She let him touch her face, feeling how her skin burned under those elegant fingers. "You don't understand," she whispered, closing her eyes and leaning against his palm. "It's not just about dying. It's about what will happen to you if I leave. You'll get sick again, maybe worse than before. My healing isn't permanent, Daniel. It's as if I'm a kind of filter, keeping the evil away from you. If I die, then we'll find another way," he interrupted, pulling her closer. "You said your grandmother knew other secrets, other rituals. There must be a way to break this curse without you having to die." Sarah looked into his eyes and saw something that surprised her. It wasn't just desire, it was love. A deep, desperate love that was willing to defy supernatural forces to protect her. And at that moment, she knew that her resistance was coming to an end. "There is a ritual," she admitted, her voice almost inaudible. "Something my grandmother mentioned once but never taught me completely. It's dangerous, it might not work, and even if it does, she swallowed hard. Even if it works, I'll lose my gifts forever. I'll never be able to heal anyone again, not even myself. I don't care, said Daniel, pulling her even closer. I'd rather have you without your gifts than lose you forever. He leaned his head, his lips almost touching hers. Let me take care of you, Sarah. Let me protect you. It was at that moment that they heard the sound of cars stopping in front of the house. Daniel immediately moved away from her, all his survival instincts activating. Through the window, he saw 3 black vehicles with dark windows and men in suits getting out of them with precise military movements. Stay behind me, he ordered, pushing Sarah behind him. But she knew there was no escape. She had felt that sinister presence approaching in recent days, like a storm forming on the horizon. The door opened with a crash, and Dr. Richard Matthews entered, followed by 2 armed men. He was a tall, thin man with cold eyes that studied everything with the precision of a scientist analyzing lab rats. Mr. Stern, he said, his voice loaded with false politeness, how good to find you finally cured. I imagine you owe this miraculous recovery to young Sarah. Get out of my house, said Sarah, her voice firm despite the fear she felt. You have no right to be here. But Matthews smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. On the contrary, my dear, I have every right. You see, I discovered some very interesting things about you, about your family, about the methods you use to heal. There are very powerful people interested in studying your abilities. He approached her, completely ignoring Daniel. So you can come with us willingly, or we can make things unpleasant. Daniel stepped forward, placing himself between Sarah and Matthews. She's not going anywhere with you, he said, his voice loaded with an authority that even in the desperate situation still impressed. You have no idea who you're messing with. On the contrary, Matthews replied, signaling to his men. I know exactly who you are, Daniel Stern, and I know that without her you'll go back to being just a rich man dying from an incurable disease. Maybe you'll even accept my services again. One of the men pointed a gun at Daniel. But if you interfere, you won't live long enough to see that happen. What happened next was an explosion of violence that none of those present expected. Daniel, even still recovering from months of illness, had kept his combat reflexes sharpened by years of military training. When the armed man looked away for a fraction of a second, he moved with the speed of a predator, disarming him with a fluid movement and using the weapon against the others. Sarah watched everything in shock, seeing a side of Daniel she never imagined existed. He moved with lethal precision, each blow calculated, each movement executed with the coldness of someone who had learned to kill long before learning to heal. In a matter of minutes, the 2 armed men were on the floor, and Matthews was backing toward the door, his face pale with terror. This doesn't end here, shouted the doctor before fleeing. There are others like me, others who know about her. You can't hide forever. His voice echoed in the empty street as he ran to the car and departed at high speed. When silence returned, Sarah was trembling, not just from fear, but from the revelation of what she had just witnessed. Daniel approached her, still holding the gun, his blue eyes shining with a dangerous intensity she had never seen before. Who are you really? She asked, her voice almost inaudible. This isn't the first time you've killed, is it? Daniel lowered the gun, his shoulders relaxing slightly, but his gaze still alert. You're not the only one with secrets, he replied, sitting heavily in a chair. My father didn't build our empire just with hotels and legitimate investments. There's a part of the family business that requires different skills. He looked at his own hands as if seeing blood that only he could see. I was trained from childhood to protect our interests, to eliminate threats when necessary. Sarah approached him slowly, her heart beating rapidly. How many people? She asked, and he immediately knew what she wanted to know. Many, he admitted, without trying to soften the truth. People who tried to blackmail us, competitors who went too far, traitors within the organization itself. I always told myself it was necessary, that it was to protect what my father built. But now, he raised his eyes to her. Now I know that the only thing that really matters protecting is you. Instead of moving away, Sarah knelt beside him, placing her hands over his. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, surprising herself with her own sincerity. "I'm afraid of what you might become if you lose me. I'm afraid that the darkness you carry inside will take over completely." Daniel intertwined his fingers with hers, feeling how that simple touch had the power to calm him more than any drug. "Then teach me," he asked. "Teach me to be different. Teach me to use my hands to heal instead of destroy." In the hours that followed, they packed quickly. Daniel activated resources that Sarah didn't even imagine existed. Secret bank accounts, fake documents, contacts in various countries. In a matter of hours, he had everything organized so they could completely disappear. "We have to go to a place where no one will find us," he explained, putting some belongings in a discreet suitcase. "I have an isolated property in the Adirondack Mountains near the Vermont border. It's a place few know about where we'll have time to discover how to break your curse." Sarah nodded, but there was something in her eyes that worried him. "Daniel," she said, stopping arranging her herbs to look at him directly, "I need you to understand something. If we go to this place, if we stay alone, I don't know if I'll be able to resist much longer. Being close to you, feeling your protection, seeing how you're willing to sacrifice everything for me." She paused, her cheeks blushing. "I've never felt anything like this before." Daniel approached her, his eyes shining with a mixture of desire and tenderness. "Then don't resist," he murmured, raising his hand to touch her face. "If our love is strong enough to defy a curse, perhaps it's strong enough to break other rules too." "You don't understand," insisted Sarah, but her voice was getting less firm with each second. "If I give myself to you, if I allow you to touch me the way I know we both want, I might die in your arms. Our first time might also be the last." "Then we'll make it worth it," he replied, leaning to kiss her forehead. "We'll make each moment, each touch, each breath so perfect that it will become eternal." They left in the late afternoon, in a discreet car that Daniel had arranged. The journey to the mountains would be long, but Sarah knew that with each mile they moved away from the city, they were approaching the moment when they would have to face what they felt for each other. And for the first time since she discovered her curse, she no longer feared death. She feared only dying without having truly lived. As they drove along the winding mountain roads, with the mountains rising around them like sleeping giants, Sarah looked at Daniel's profile illuminated by the last rays of the sun. He had completely changed her life, had awakened in her feelings she thought were impossible, and now, isolated from the world, they would have to discover if their love was strong enough to defy forces that existed before either of them was born. Daniel's property in the Adirondack Mountains was a refuge that few knew about. Built in the midst of a dense forest, the house of wood and stone stood like a natural fortress, protected by centuries-old trees and the silence of the mountains. When they arrived, it was already night, and Sarah felt a strange peace taking over her. It was as if that place existed outside of time, far from the rules and curses that governed the world below. "My father built this house as an escape," explained Daniel, lighting the fireplace in the main room. "When business got too intense, he came here to reconnect with something more primitive, more true." The flames danced in his eyes, creating shadows that made him seem even more mysterious. I never understood what he meant until now. Sarah walked through the house, exploring each room. There was something magical about that place, an energy that resonated with her own gifts. In the library, she found ancient books on alternative medicine, healing rituals, and even some volumes on ancestral magic. "Did your father know about these things?" she asked, leafing through a treatise on medicinal herbs written in Latin. "He never spoke openly about it, but I suspect so," Daniel replied, approaching her. "There were stories in the family about special women, healers that our ancestors protected. Perhaps our meeting wasn't as accidental as we thought." He gently touched the leather cover of one of the books. "Perhaps it was destiny bringing us together." That first night they maintained a respectful distance, but the tension between them was almost tangible. Sarah prepared a simple dinner, with the ingredients she found in the kitchen, and they ate in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. When it came time to sleep, Daniel insisted that she take the master bedroom while he would settle on the living room sofa. But Sarah could barely close her eyes. With each sound that came from the living room, her heart raced. She knew he was equally awake, fighting against the same desires that consumed her. Around 3 in the morning, she gave up pretending she could sleep and went to the kitchen to prepare a tea. She found Daniel standing on the porch observing the stars. "Can't sleep either," she asked, offering him a cup. He accepted, his fingers brushing against hers for a moment that seemed eternal. "I can't stop thinking," he admitted. "About you, about us, about how it would be if there was no curse at all. If we could just be a man and a woman who met and fell in love." He took a sip of the tea, savoring the mixture of herbs she had prepared. "Do you really believe you'll die if we're together?" Sarah leaned on the porch railing, looking at the silent mountains. "My grandmother was always very clear about this. She told me about other women in our lineage who tried to break the rule. They all died in terrible ways." She paused, her eyes filling with tears. "But lately, I've been wondering if living without love isn't a form of dying too." Daniel moved, closer to her, placing his hand over hers on the railing. "What if there's another way? What if we can find a way to break the curse without you having to die?" Sarah turned to him, and for the first time he saw hope in her eyes. "There's something I haven't told you," she said, her voice almost inaudible, "about the ritual my grandmother mentioned. She said that if a woman of our lineage found a man, willing to face death for her, willing to share the weight of the curse, it might be possible to transfer the power instead of losing it." She looked directly into his eyes. "But that would mean you would also risk dying." "I already ran that risk the day I met you," he replied, gently pulling her closer. "My life has no meaning without you, Sarah. If there's a chance, however small, that we can be together, then I'll take it." In the days that followed, they dedicated themselves to studying the books in the library, looking for clues about the ritual that Sarah's grandmother had mentioned. Daniel used his contacts to get translations of ancient texts, while Sarah tried to remember every detail of the stories she had heard in childhood. It was during one of these research sessions that they found a specific reference to the Black Moon Ritual, an ancestral procedure that allowed the transfer of magical powers between two people who truly loved each other. The ritual required that both be willing to sacrifice their previous lives to be reborn as something new. It says here that the ritual must be performed during the new moon, when the darkness is total, read Daniel, translating a text in Latin. The participants must be completely surrendered to each other, without fear, without doubt, without regret. He raised his eyes to Sarah. "The next new moon is 3 days from now." Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and terror. "What if it doesn't work? What if we both die?" Daniel closed the book and knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. "Then we'll die together," he said, his voice firm. "I prefer that to living separated from you." He gently kissed her hands. "But I believe it will work. I believe our love is strong enough to defy any curse." In those last days before the new moon, they allowed themselves to live like a normal couple. They cooked together, walked through the forest, talked about dreams and plans for the future. Daniel told about his lonely childhood, about the pressure of inheriting an empire, about how he had never felt truly alive until he met her. Sarah shared her memories of life with her grandmother, her fears, her hopes, and slowly, inevitably, the physical distance between them began to diminish. Small touches, longer looks, moments when they almost kissed before one of them backed away. The tension became more intense each day, and both knew that when the night of the new moon arrived, there would be no turning back. The night of the new moon arrived with a silence that seemed supernatural. The sky was completely dark, without a single visible star, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Sarah spent the entire day in preparations, rigorously following the instructions she had found in the ancient books. She prepared baths with specific herbs, lit candles at strategic points in the house, and created a sacred circle in the main room using sea salt and white rose petals. Daniel watched her work, fascinated by the precision of each movement. There was something hypnotic in the way she moved, as if she were dancing an ancestral choreography she knew by heart. When she finished the preparations, the sun had already completely set, and the external darkness seemed to penetrate through the windows like a living entity. "Are you sure?" he asked, approaching the sacred circle. "There's no turning back after we start." Sarah was in the center of the circle, wearing only a simple white dress she had found in the closet. By candlelight, she seemed ethereal, like an ancient goddess, preparing for a sacred ritual. "I've never been so sure of anything in my life," she replied, extending her hand to him. "Whatever the outcome, at least we'll know we tried, that we fought for our love." Daniel entered the circle and immediately felt a strange energy course through his body, as if 1,000 small lightning bolts were dancing under his skin. Sarah began to recite words in a language he didn't recognize, but which sounded familiar in some primitive way. Her voice echoed through the room, creating impossible harmonies that seemed to come from multiple dimensions. As she spoke, the candles began to flicker, and Daniel felt the air around them becoming denser, charged with a force that defied explanation. "Now," she whispered, stopping the recitation. "Now we need to give ourselves completely to each other, without fear, without doubt, without protection." She approached him, her brown eyes shining with an intensity that seemed to pierce his soul. "If you touch me now, you won't be able to." "Stop. The ritual will follow its course to the end." Daniel raised his hands and touched her face, feeling how her skin burned under his fingers. "Then so be it," he murmured, leaning to kiss her. The moment their lips met, an explosion of energy ran through the sacred circle, making all the candles go out simultaneously, plunging them into absolute darkness. But they didn't need light, guided by their senses, by their hands, by the desperate need they had repressed for so long. They began to undress slowly, each piece of clothing that fell to the floor representing one less barrier between them. When they finally found themselves naked, embraced in the center of the circle, Daniel felt he was touching not just a woman, but the very essence of life. What happened in the hours that followed transcended everything either of them had imagined about intimacy. It wasn't just a physical act, but a fusion of souls, a sacred dance between two people who had found their other half. Sarah, who had never been touched by a man, discovered that her body instinctively knew each movement, each caress, as if she had been created specifically for that moment. Daniel, who had known countless women, realized he had never really made love before. Everything he had experienced in the past had been merely shadows compared to the intensity of what he felt with Sarah. Each of her touches healed wounds he didn't even know he carried. Each moan that escaped from her lips was like a prayer that purified his soul. As their passions intensified, strange phenomena began to occur around them. The candles lit themselves, projecting dancing shadows on the walls. A gentle breeze, impossible inside the closed house, began to circulate through the sacred circle, bringing aromas of wildflowers and moist earth. It was as if nature itself was witnessing and blessing their union. At the culminating moment of their mutual surrender, when both lost themselves completely in each other, Sarah felt something breaking inside her. It wasn't pain, but a deep liberation, as if invisible. Chains that had bound her for years finally broke. At the same time, Daniel experienced a sensation of completeness he never imagined possible, as if a part of himself that had been lost for decades had finally returned to its place. When the ecstasy passed, and they found themselves intertwined, on the floor of the sacred circle, breathing heavily, Sarah opened her eyes and smiled. "I'm still alive," she whispered, touching his face with trembling fingers. "We're still alive." Daniel pulled her closer, feeling tears of relief running down his face. "It worked," he murmured, kissing her forehead. "We did it." But as the minutes passed, both began to realize that something fundamental had changed. The energy that had always surrounded Sarah was different, more subtle, but also more stable. And Daniel felt a connection with her that went far beyond the physical, as if part of her powers had transferred to him. "I can feel it," said Sarah, amazed. "I can feel our connection. It's as if we've become two parts of the same being." She rose slowly, and Daniel followed her, both still naked, still united by invisible threads of energy that connected them. "Does this mean the curse is broken?" he asked, helping her to stand. Sarah closed her eyes, as if listening to something only she could perceive. "No," she answered, opening her eyes with an expression of understanding. "It's not broken. It's transformed. Now it belongs to us instead of controlling us." She touched his chest, and Daniel felt a warmth spreading throughout his body. Now we can choose how to use our power together. But their moment of triumph was interrupted by a sound that froze the blood of both. The noise of cars approaching on the mountain road. Many cars. The sound of engines approaching on the winding mountain road grew with each second. Daniel and Sarah dressed quickly, but there was something different in the way they moved now. Their gestures were synchronized, as if they shared a single consciousness. When he raised his hand to get a gun from the secret hiding place, she was already moving to extinguish the ritual candles, both anticipating the other's actions. "How many cars?" asked Sarah, her voice surprisingly calm considering the danger approaching. Daniel peeked through the window, counting the headlights that snaked along the road. "At least 6, he replied, checking the ammunition in his pistol. Matthews brought reinforcements this time, but when he turned to look at Sarah, he was surprised by what he saw. She didn't seem frightened. There was a determination in her eyes that he had never seen before, a strength that seemed to emanate from much more than just courage. "They made a mistake," she said, walking to the window and observing the vehicles now parking in front of the house. "They came to us at the moment when we are most powerful, when our union is strongest." She turned to him, and Daniel saw that her eyes shone with a strange, almost supernatural light. "You feel it too, don't you? The energy that flows between us?" And he did feel it. It was as if an invisible electric current connected them, allowing them to share not just feelings but also instincts, reflexes, even thoughts. When she moved to the left, he automatically positioned himself to the right, creating a perfect defensive formation without needing verbal communication. "Dr. Richard." Matthews got out of the first car, followed by at least a dozen armed men. This time he had prepared better. He had brought professional mercenaries, ex-military, who would not be easily intimidated. But there was something that bothered him about the quietness of the house, the way no lights were on, as if the place was empty. "Surround the house," he ordered, his voice echoing in the silent night. "Don't let anyone escape. We want the woman alive, but the man is dispensable." His men spread out with military efficiency, some positioning themselves at the windows, others guarding the possible escape routes. Inside the house, Sarah closed her eyes and began to whisper words in a language that Daniel now recognized as being the same from the ritual. But this time, the words were not of union, but of protection, of war. As she spoke, the plants in the house began to grow at an accelerated rate, their leaves becoming greener, more vibrant. "What's happening?" asked Daniel, watching fascinated as the ivy on the windows thickened, creating a natural barrier. "I'm asking for help," Sarah replied, opening her eyes. "The earth here is ancient, full of power, and now that we're connected, I can access forces that were previously forbidden to me." She extended her hand to him. "Trust me." When their hands touched, Daniel felt a wave of energy course through his body, different from anything he had ever experienced. It was as if he could feel every tree, every stone, every animal in the forest around the house, and more than that, he could control them. The first group of mercenaries tried to force the front door, but the wood hardened like steel, resisting all their efforts. When they tried to break the windows, the ivy intertwined like steel, creating an impenetrable barrier. Some men tried to climb the walls, but the branches of nearby trees moved like tentacles, knocking them to the ground. "This is impossible," murmured Matthews, watching his men fight against forces that defied all logic. "Use the grenades," he ordered, desperate. "Destroy everything if necessary." But when the first grenade exploded, something extraordinary happened. The explosion was contained by an invisible barrier, and the destructive energy was absorbed by the earth, causing the surrounding plants to grow even more vigorously. It was as if nature itself was protecting the house and its occupants. Inside the house, Sarah and Daniel moved like dancers in a deadly choreography. He used his combat skills, but now amplified by her powers. His movements were faster, more precise, more lethal. She channeled the energy of the earth, but now with his strategic coldness, each decision calculated for maximum efficiency. When they finally left the house to face the attackers, they were a force that none of the mercenaries was prepared to face. Sarah moved her hands and the trees responded, their branches intertwining to create living cages around the armed men. Daniel moved between the shadows like a ghost, disarming enemies with a precision that bordered on the supernatural. In a matter of minutes, most of the mercenaries were incapacitated, trapped by the plants or disarmed by Daniel. Only Matthews remained, cornered against his own car, his face pale with terror. "This is impossible," he repeated, his hands trembling. "You're not human. What kind of monsters are you?" Sarah approached him, her eyes shining with a light that wasn't entirely human. "We're not monsters," she said, her voice echoing with impossible harmonies. "We're something new, something you helped create with your obsession." She raised her hand, and Matthews felt an invisible pressure pushing him against the car. "You have a choice," said Daniel, appearing beside her. "You can leave now, forget you ever met us, and continue your life anywhere far from here. Or you can try to bother us again and discover that our patience has limits." Matthews looked around, seeing his men trapped by the plants, moaning in pain but still alive. "And if I choose the first option?" he asked, his voice almost inaudible. "Then you'll have 5 minutes to get off our mountain," Sarah replied, lowering her hand. "And if we ever meet again, we won't be so merciful." The plants that held the mercenaries loosened, allowing them to free themselves. Matthews didn't need to be told twice. In a matter of minutes, all the cars had left, disappearing down the mountain road as if they had never existed. Silence returned to the mountains, but now it was a different silence, loaded with possibilities instead of threats. Sarah and Daniel stood on the porch, watching the last headlights disappear into the darkness. "It's over," she said, leaning against him. "It's finally over." "No," he corrected, kissing the top of her head. "Now it's beginning." 6 months passed since that night in the Adirondack Mountains. The house of wood and stone had become a sanctuary, where Sarah and Daniel built a life that defied all the rules they knew about love, power, and destiny. Together, they had discovered that their union not only broke the curse, but created something completely new, a perfect symbiosis between two beings who complemented each other in a supernatural way. Daniel completely transformed his business. He sold the obscure participations in weapons technology and questionable investments, keeping only the hotels and creating a new division focused on holistic healing centers. Sarah became his partner in every sense, not just as a companion, but as a co-founder of a network of clinics that combined modern medicine with ancestral knowledge. Their first clinics were opened in New York, Boston, and Burlington, always in locations close to nature, where Sarah could work with medicinal plants and Daniel could use his business experience to make treatments accessible to people of all social classes. The success was immediate and inexplicable to those who didn't know the secret behind their effectiveness. On a spring morning, while Sarah prepared a new infusion in the laboratory they had built in the mountain house, Daniel received a phone call that made him smile in a way she hadn't seen in weeks. It was the Children's Hospital in New York, he said, entering the laboratory with an expression of pure happiness. "Remember the little girl with leukemia you treated last month? She's completely cured. The doctors are calling it a miracle." Sarah stopped what she was doing and turned to him, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "I felt it," she whispered. "When I touched her, I felt she would be all right. But hearing the confirmation—" She couldn't finish the sentence, too moved to continue. Daniel approached and pulled her into his arms, feeling how perfectly she fit against his chest. "I'm proud of you," he murmured, kissing her hair. "I'm proud of us, of what we've managed to build." In recent months, they had discovered that their powers were constantly evolving. Sarah not only healed with herbs and touches, but developed a medical intuition that surprised even the most experienced specialists. Daniel, in turn, discovered that his old calculating coldness had transformed into an ability for organization and strategy that made it impossible for any project to fail. Together, they were unstoppable, not just in business, but in everything. Their connection had deepened to the point where they could communicate without words, feel each other's emotions, even when they were in different cities. It was as if they had become two faces of the same soul. "There's something I need to tell you," said Sarah, moving slightly away to look into his eyes. There was something different in her expression, a mixture of excitement and nervousness that made Daniel's heart race. "In the last few weeks, I've felt changes in my body, changes I didn't expect." Daniel held her face between his hands, studying her expression. "What kind of changes?" he asked, his voice soft but loaded with concern. "I'm pregnant," she said, and the words came out like a reverent whisper. "I took the test 3 times, consulted doctors discreetly. There's no doubt." She covered his hands with hers. "We're expecting a child." The silence that followed was loaded with pure emotion. Daniel felt as if the whole world had stopped, as if the entire universe was suspended in that moment. He had imagined many things when he fell in love with Sarah, but he had never dared to dream of the possibility of having children with her. "But is it possible?" he asked, his voice choked. "After everything we've been through, after the curse, the ritual?" Sarah smiled, and it was the most radiant smile he had ever seen in his life. "Not only is it possible, it's perfect," she replied. "I can feel our child growing inside me. I can feel that she will inherit the best of both of us, your strength and my sensitivity, your pragmatism and my intuition. She will be special, Daniel. She will be the first of a new generation." They were married in an intimate ceremony in the mountain house itself, with only a few close friends and employees from their clinics as witnesses. Sarah wore a simple white cotton dress with wildflowers in her hair, and Daniel wore a dark suit without a tie, his feet bare on the earth that had witnessed their transformation. The priest who married them was an elderly man who had been cured by Sarah of a terminal illness, and who understood that he was witnessing something sacred. When they exchanged vows, the plants around the house flowered simultaneously, creating an explosion of colors and aromas that seemed like a blessing from nature itself. "I promise to love you beyond this life," said Daniel, holding her hands. "I promise to protect our family, our dreams, our love until the end of time." Sarah responded with words that seemed to come from a place deeper than her own soul. "I promise to heal you whenever you need," she said, tears running down her face. "I promise to be your partner in everything, your strength when you are weak, your light when the world is dark." When they kissed, sealing their official union, all those present felt a special energy permeating the air, as if they were witnessing the birth of something new in the world. 9 months later, Helen was born on an autumn morning, when the leaves of the trees around the house were as golden as her hair. She came into the world without complications, with her father's blue eyes and her mother's serenity. From the first day, it was obvious that she had inherited special gifts. Plants flowered when she touched them, and her presence calmed even the wildest animals. Now, 5 years later, the family had become a discreet legend in the world of alternative medicine. Their clinics had spread throughout the United States and began to expand to other countries. Helen grew up as a normal child, but with extraordinary abilities that Sarah and Daniel carefully taught her to control. "Daddy, the flowers are sad today," said Helen one morning, pointing to a vase on the porch. Daniel knelt beside his daughter, observing the petunias that really seemed wilted. "Then maybe you can help them," he suggested, watching as she gently touched the petals. Immediately the flowers rose, their colors becoming more vibrant. "But remember what Mommy always says. Our gifts are to help, not to show off," recited Helen, repeating the lesson she had learned since she was little. "And we must keep it a secret, because not everyone understands." Sarah appeared on the porch carrying a tray with breakfast. At 35, she had become even more beautiful, with a maturity that only intensified her natural beauty. Her belly showed the first signs of a second pregnancy, discovered only the week before. "Good morning, my family," she said, kissing first Helen and then Daniel. "What plans do we have for today?" Daniel pulled her onto his lap, careful with her condition, and Helen snuggled against both. "Today we're just going to be happy," he replied, looking at the mountain landscape that stretched out before them. "Tomorrow we can save the world." And so, on a golden morning in the Adirondack Mountains, the family that had been born from the impossible love between a lost magnate and a cursed healer continued writing their story. A story that proved that true love can not only conquer any obstacle, but can also transform curses into blessings, suffering into healing, and dark destinies into luminous futures. The empire that Daniel had built with coldness and calculation had become a legacy of love and healing. The curse that haunted Sarah's lineage for generations had transformed into a gift that benefited thousands of people. And together they had discovered that some love stories are too powerful to be limited by human